It started with just those 27 newsrooms. Now there are 400. Nonprofit news is growing because it is positioning as a community good. We see an added impact from nonprofit news now in that it is helping create an entirely new news ecosystem of collaboration, shared news reporting.
오늘 이제 미국의 비영리 독립매체 한 400여 개 뉴스룸이 이제 가맹되어 있는 거대한 네트워크죠. 이제 INN의 크로스 대표님을 모시고 미국에서 비영리 뉴스룸이 왜 이렇게 이제 붐을 일으키고 있는지 상세히 들어보는 시간 가지도록 하겠습니다. 자, 박수를 한번 맞아주실까요?
김영진 편집장님, 감사합니다. 기자 여러분, 안녕하십니까. I'm very honored to be here today. 뉴스타파 is known around the world as one of the greatest investigative news nonprofits. So today as we talk, I'll tell you a little bit about nonprofit news throughout the US, how it has grown, the economics that are working and some ideas for startups, and how we can support each other. And then we will have plenty of time for questions. So INN is what we call it for short. We are what's called a backbone organization, or the center of a network of about 400 newsrooms now across the United States. They're all nonprofit. In the US, if you are a nonprofit, you must be nonpartisan. That's by federal law. And they are reinventing journalism as a public service. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of INN so you understand how it fits with investigative reporting, which I know is very important to you there as well. This was on the screen is the founding declaration that created INN in 2009. And it was created by a coalition of 27 investigative journalists who feared that with the collapse of newspapers, investigative journalism would be lost unless they set aside and stopped competing with each other and formed a consortium to share their investigative reporting. Our mission, all nonprofits in the US have a mission statement. Ours is to build a nonprofit news network that ensures all people in every community have access to trusted news. And INN advances this in our work by providing education and business support to our member organizations and promoting the value of public service, nonprofit journalism, and investigative journalism. We support and advance the public's trust in news, which is very low in the United States. But we support that through standards that all of our members make public on their websites or in their newsletters. And those standards are around editorial excellence, high quality journalism, transparency around who pays for their reporting. Their donors are all declared publicly, and their board of directors, which runs the news organizations. All of that is available to the public, and there are studies showing that increases public trust. 2, we are aiming to create an enduring, sustainable news ecosystem. So we're not just supporting a project or a freelancer, but we are trying to support and build enduring newsrooms supported by their communities. 3, we are investing in talent and news leaders to lead these kinds of newsrooms, much as your journalism class is there. We collaborate, we organize collaborations between newsrooms to extend the impact of their work, and we do research that informs how the field builds. So the result of this work has been a growth in the network. It started with just those 27 newsrooms. Now there are 400. One other thing I should mention is that almost all of these newsrooms are digital native. They publish on the web, and they publish on mobile phones. The whole field's only 12 years old, so we don't really see long term, but the trends are encouraging. Overall, they add up to about a $500 million sector in terms of their total annual revenue across those 400 sites. So I'll walk through some of the major statistics that show the impact of nonprofit news. Across all our members, we have 2,700 journalists. To put that in perspective, that's now more journalists in these small nonprofit newsrooms than Reuters has globally. So it amounts to a very large network of journalists. Most work in quite small newsrooms. The average or median is around 7 people per news organization, but they're adding up, and the large ones, of course, have much more. Together, those journalists, if we look at the news coverage they're producing, it's about 400,000 stories per year. It's over that now. So more than 1,000 stories a day across the network. And the other distinction that is so important in the impact of nonprofit journalism here is that it is shared. Just like NewsTapa provides its news to other stations and shares it, that is true here. The 400 members give their recording away, mostly free or at very low cost, to more than 6,000 other news media. And that means this nonprofit news, directly or indirectly through media partners, is now reaching almost all Americans. As we look ahead at growth, we are now where that dot is at about 400 news organizations. We expect that to grow to 600 by 2025 so that the network impact will keep growing. I would say that the significance of this isn't the growth in the US, but that now what we see happening, what you are doing in Korea and we are seeing in other countries have had more support of commercial media. So they're at this point earlier in this curve. So while it may seem very small now that there are just 1 or 2 outlets per country, we expect to see the same kind of growth over time. So I'll spend a few minutes talking about what is different about nonprofit news versus commercial news. Because I believe it's important if you go out to start nonprofit newsrooms, how the public thinks of it differently, not just how we think about it differently as journalists. There also are many for-profit startups launching in the US, but they tend to be driven by advertising. So they may have celebrity news or crime news, or just like community events, they aren't doing in-depth reporting as much. Nonprofit news is growing because it is positioning as a community good, part of the community, like a library, like our schools, like a neighborhood senior center. So we're changing how people think about news to think about it as a public good. In terms of types of coverage, at the top, general news and events, that's mostly local, covering all general news in a community. although most are small, and so they still get started by focusing on one key issue, the big issue in any community. But the significant part about nonprofit news, as it is with 뉴스타파, is the depth of coverage. Investigative coverage in the analysis or explanatory. Nonprofits are becoming the beat reporters on most of our complex issues. So climate change and environment, social justice and criminal justice, immigration, education, complicated topics where you have to invest in expertise and in-depth reporting. Nonprofits are doing that and then providing that reporting to many other news media that no longer have that depth. We see an added impact from nonprofit news now in that it is, because the news is shared, it is helping slow the decline and create an entirely new news ecosystem of collaboration, shared news reporting. It is creating enduring newsrooms. It's setting a standard for editorial excellence. The nonprofits win a lot of journalism prizes, a disproportionate amount, and that reflects the quality of reporting. So now I will shift to our biggest challenge as journalists, the money, phone, getting people to pay for our reporting, and spend some time on this in hopes that it will help you as you set out on your journey. So I won't spend a lot of time on this slide because I think you know the story. This is a global shift. The chart shows the decline in newspaper advertising. We do not think this is going to change. We see what is happening as a global market failure in news. And I think what this all adds up to is two things. Consumers still expect news to be free, largely paid for by advertising. Yet we, as journalists, as news publishers, need to change the culture so that people view news reporting as something they support and as part of the community that they support. So some do's and don'ts to think about as you build your news outlets. Do ask the public, go out to the public and ask what they want. As journalists, we often think we know what's important, and our funders may also think this is what the public really cares about. But in all cases that we're seeing, the relationship between the press and public, while it is still independent, is changing and it's more interactive. And so success is based on asking the public, what do you need from your news outlet? The other important thing is to explain to the public why independence is important in journalism. You know, in most businesses, if I do you a favor, you do me a favor. And so people may, and businesses may not be corrupt or trying to do anything wrong, but they will expect, oh, if I give you money, I get to suggest a story, or you want my input. And so you want their support, but you will want to have something on your website about editorial independence, explaining why it's important, how it works, so they understand it's a general principle and don't take it personally if you say, no, you can't influence our coverage. It's very, very hard to create a news organization alone. That's why INN exists as a network. And so I'm glad you are doing this in partnership with 뉴스타파. This is what is working in the United States, is forming networks or form partnerships. So you may have different news publications or outlets, but you're built around a common core, or you're partnering with each other. and I'll give you a few examples. This is Cityside outside of San Francisco. It started with one publication, Berkeley Side. It grew into the next city over, Oakland Side, and now it has a food publication, Nosh. So you have 3 community outlets, very different, completely different coverage, but they have a common core. So they are more efficient, they support each other, and Cityside expects to keep expanding. Second example is ProPublica, which is a large national investigative outlet. And so this is a page for ProPublica's local reporting network. So this may be similar to what some of you are thinking of doing with 뉴스타파. You have a large national, well-known investigative newsroom. And it's partnering with local outlets in several ways. It gives grants to support projects that then run locally and also nationally. In some cases, it pays for and embeds investigative reporters in local newsrooms. They then can get the expert investigative editing from ProPublica, and it has a variety of other kinds of local and national partnerships. Finally, Kim Young-jin 편집장님 asked me to talk about how we can support each other in this global movement. And I think that's very important, and it's why I'm so honored to be talking to you today. I think of how we support each other and learn from each other. I have been talking for a long time now and about what is building in the US in journalism, but I think the US also has a great deal to learn from what you are doing in Korea. When I visited 뉴스타파 in late 2019, as I was throughout Seoul, I was so struck by how all journalists and just all kinds of people I met talked about democracy in very real, current time language. I think because your democracy movement is recent, that people pointed out where protests were held, what people were doing in the 1980s in the movement, who was jailed, who fought for these various rights. So the other side of that here is that in the United States, until very recently, people have taken democracy for granted. The fight for democracy was more than 200 years ago, and people have assumed it's here, and people have assumed journalism and a free press is here. And I think Americans are just starting to realize that that is not a certainty. And so I think we can learn from you greatly, and we can support each other. This start of journalism is a public resource rather than a business. It is really global. And I think anything you publish, any examples, we will be looking at eagerly to learn from you. And please do not hesitate to be in touch with us and ask us questions, or if you want to connect with specific news outlets that are doing something similar to what you have in mind, I am happy to make introductions. But stay in touch. Let us know how it's going. If you come to Los Angeles, let me know and I will buy you a delicious meal.